have seen beyond the bounds of infinity and drawn down demons from the stars.
When I was a teenager, I was often home alone as my dad spent a lot of his time at our summer cottage with his girlfriend. I was responsible for the house, and if I needed to be informed of anything, my dad would call our home landline phone. Sometimes it would be about how to handle the fireplace on colder nights. Sometimes just ask if the house was still in working order. One night, the phone rang, and instead of the normal going up the stairs to pick it up, I got a really bad feeling. Like if I picked up, it was going to be really bad. Like I should not answer the phone. I shook the feeling away because if my dad was calling this late, it had to be important. Only when I picked it up, it wasn't my dad. It was this not a human voice saying,
Hello.
I admit to smashing the phone back onto its holder and not wasting much time to get my shoes and jacket to run out. Yeah, I apparently scare easy. Fast forward 2 years. I'm in my first apartment and I have my own mobile phone. I was walking my brand new puppy when I got a call that went straight to voicemail. I got the same dread feeling, even though it was a sunny day and I was outdoors. I played my message, and I had one from my grandma and one from unknown number. I played both. The one from my grandma was just normal, like, call me back when you get this. And then, when I got to the other one, it was the same,
Hello.
in a not a human voice that I had heard a few years ago. I know it sounds ridiculous, but this is 100% true. The only way I can describe the voice is that it was between a growl and a speaking voice. This is something I don't tell people. Not because I'm a believer in paranormal, but because it sounds so weird. I also still don't like to be at my dad's house alone. It's a creepy circus of its own, but the phone calls still bother me, even though it's like 17 years ago.
I grew up in Cochise County, Arizona. Back in 87 or 88, my sister thought that it would be fun to buy a Ouija board and play around with it. I was in the 5th grade at the time and she was in 3rd. We both used it with our friends and amazed at the possibilities of reaching out to the dead. Of course, we asked questions about our futures and what heaven was like. I suspected my friend was the one controlling it as everything from my future sucked while his was on the path of Richie Rich. Everything changed when some of my mom's students came over to hang out. And this was the 80s, so things were different. 2 of my mom's students, we'll call them CJ and JT, adored her. When my sister told them about the board, their teenage minds kicked in. They told us about a spirit named Chris. He was a murder victim that lived in Bisbee from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. I remember him having a sense of humor, and we spoke with him frequently. His accounts of the future was different from my friends'. Some of it was over 30 years ago. I can't recall those details as they weren't important. It's what happened after a few sessions. It was a weekend night. My dad was working the late shift, so it was the 3 of us and her 2 students. They were having a session when they contacted something more malevolent. The entity claimed to be Satan himself, and worse yet, it refused to leave. They'd say goodbye and it would just move to no. It was taunting them. Naturally, the students and my mom started freaking out. I remember my mom commanding it to leave and quoting scripture, but it refused. Then it started to spell out a last name. The energy in the room changed. It wasn't cold. It was weird. After a bit, we walked away from it, but I distinctly remember my mom leaving the planchette on the letter R because I contacted it the first letter of my friend's last name. She didn't care. Everyone was spooked. We left the board by itself and went into the family room to decompress and watch a movie. About 30 minutes later or so, the doorbell rings. Another of her students. I invited them in and remembered the board. I checked and I was shocked to see that it had moved to P, the first letter of our last name. I told my mom this and she brushed it off as me doing it to mess around. I think it scared the hell out of her. After that, we tried it again and got a hold of Chris. Immediately the energy changed and felt relaxed and warm. He said that Satan didn't move it, and that he was a pussy. We ended up picking up the board and putting it in the closet in my sister's room. She claimed that she'd hear voices coming from it at night. We ended up getting rid of it after a close family friend who worked in cleansing houses saw it and freaked out. We never had anything else happen after that. Never had anything really before. My parents sold the house in '88 and we moved to a different town. Now, I've always been the one to seek rational explanations for things. This game was invented around the turn of the century, i.e., probably fake. The only thing that I can come up with was that after we left, one of them must have moved it, or whatever they contacted moved it when we left. When speaking with CJ earlier this month about it, she says she didn't remember anyone leaving the room until the doorbell rang, but she did say that it spooked her. To this day, neither my sister nor I have owned one of those games. So there you go. I do have other instances later that both my sister and I experienced, but that'll be a post for another time.
I'm not too sure where to start. After a hasty move, I ended up living in the projects for a little bit after moving as quick as I could. Nothing was worse than the situation I was in. While I was living there, I met a girl. We hit it off and started dating. Before I knew it, we were in a serious relationship. Neither of us were a fan of where I lived, and one day she mentioned that her dad owned an apartment and a back house on the property was available. I made up a story for my landlord and was able to break the lease without penalty. The back house turned out to be a really nice 2-bedroom unit. It had everything, including washer-dryer hookups and my own parking spot that had a gate that I could manually open and close and locked with a key. This place quickly felt like home. One day I went to a friend's house. He had another friend there, and they were at his computer watching some Faces of Death stuff. I didn't want to get involved, but my curiosity got the best of me, and I saw a few videos that I really hoped were fake. I wasn't there too long. It was a little too much, so I left. That night, I began having one of the strangest, kind of terrifying, recurring dreams. This went on for weeks. I will do my best to describe everything. It starts in a very dimly lit room from a distance. At least, I think it is. I'm seeing everything in that dream third-person perspective. I'm starting to see shapes in the darkness. I'm starting to hear just like the mantra. It's extremely deep, has extreme bass, and I can feel it through my entire body as the volume increases. Visibility increases as the sound gets louder, and I start to make something out. I'm extremely overwhelmed by the sound and the feelings, but I'm trying to focus. There is a woman that looks naked and flailing around. Everything is dark, but I can make out 2 figures. As I get closer and the sound gets even louder, it starts getting brighter, but only slightly. 2 figures become 4, and I'm able to see more, and I realize the woman is flailing because these beings each have a hold of one of her limbs. It looks like she's trying to free herself. She begins screaming violently, and the gets louder and heavier. It begins rattling my soul. I don't know how to describe it, a feeling I experienced in this dream, and this dream alone. She begins screaming even louder. It's clear that this is a very strange ritualistic room, illuminated by several candles. As she screams, I start to drift closer. She's naked. She has what looks like mud all over her body. Something is wrong. She not only is trying to break free, but she's clearly in great pain. As I realize this, her stomach begins to grow, like a sped-up pregnancy. She's kicking and trying to rip her arms away, screaming louder and louder as she grows. When it looks like she's straight up full term and ready to pop, I drift closer. The noise gets louder. I start noticing adult-sized fingers dragging and poking out from the inside. I realize the men are no longer holding her limbs, but instead have her bound by chains, each one holding a chain. She stops fighting and screams even louder. The scream is getting piercing. The sound of the Om is getting deeper and overwhelmingly loud. And then it happens. Two extremely dark grey hands tear through the woman's stomach, then quickly pulls its hands back in. I'm getting closer. A grey bald head starts rising out of the hole it just put in the woman's stomach from the inside. This thing is rising out of her, its head cocked down. The Om is getting louder and darker, and I can't help to get the feeling that I'm in a lot of trouble. The figure rises. The woman stopped moving a long time ago, and this thing continues to slowly rise to the sound of the Om. It's a grey figure, some kind of demon. I'm getting closer. I'm getting more terrified. When it's fully free, it's levitating over the body. I get pulled directly face to face to this thing. Its eyes are closed, head cocked down. In an instant, it snaps its head up and opens its eye. It's horrific, glowing yellow. It scares me so bad I wake up. This nightmare would keep me up for the next few weeks. My girlfriend started complaining of the feeling of a cold hand on her feet at night, and soon this was another place she feared spending the night. She felt like something would pick on her at night, like she wasn't welcome. The day I proposed to her proved that she wasn't lying. I made plans to propose to my now wife. I asked permission. I did everything old school. The day I planned to propose, everything was going wrong. My girlfriend's car was suddenly having issues. It died on her 3 times in the same day. This put her in a bad mood. We get to our restaurant for dinner, and it turned out my reservation was booked for the exact time the damn place closes. I still hope someone got fired for that bullshit. Anyways, we leave, and I quickly find a decent place nearby on Yelp. We get there. The food was good, but the place was cramped. There wasn't much space between chairs, so it was impossible for me to get down on one knee. Dinner's over. We get back to my place, and I can't wait another night. I'm proposing now. While we're not in the kitchen, I start telling her that I can no longer wait, gave her a little speech, and got on one knee. She says yes. We're hugging for a while. Then everything in my cupboard proceeds to fly out as if the supports from all the shelves broke at the same time. It looked like an avalanche. It was loud, thunderous, and a bitch to clean up. The night I proposed was also the same night I told her I think I'm being followed. She would stay the night and complain about cold hands on her feet all the time. She assumed that it was me while I was getting ready for work. I would just say, "You're tripping," and then left it at that. The next few weeks, she would say this. I would only have that dream when she was gone. My fiance's jewelry started disappearing. She started getting scratches. Things got bizarre. Not long after, things escalated to WTF status. I'm at my house, alone. I'm having the same dream, but everything is somehow more vivid, more real, more intense. This woman is screaming and screaming, and I'm closer than I've ever been before. And I see the hands in the stomach, and I see the grey head force and rip its way out of her stomach. I'm much closer now. I'm being forced to watch everything. I see her stomach open, and there's blood everywhere, where inside are wiggling live worms. Then this grey thing rockets out of her stomach and opens its eyes, locking eyes with me. It scares me so bad I woke up, but I wasn't ready for what happened next. I wake up from this dream like a straight-up jump scare. I wake up to blood-curdling screaming. I mentioned before that I have my own parking spot. Like I said before, this was a back house, and their parking spot was right next to the back house. The property was fenced in. There was a metal gate that manually opened and closed. I was the only one with a key besides the landlord. The entrance to the spot was from an alley. At night, it was dark and spooky, and sometimes I would be lazy about locking the gate. I snap out of this dream, woken up by fear. Before I catch my breath, my heart skips a beat when I start hearing screaming. I mean, screaming. It's really loud and I can hear the labor between each breath. I freeze for a few seconds. The noise is coming from right outside my window on the alley side. But it doesn't sound like it's in the alley. It sounds like it's right outside my window. And it dawns on me that I didn't lock the door. I just gave some lunatic the perfect place to bring someone. I have the Wish app. I buy stupid shit like a machete that looks like a samurai sword. So what? I don't own a gun. This is all I have to protect myself, and hopefully it's enough for what I'm about to do. The screaming is so loud, it's terrifying. Someone needs help. I'm on my way. I turn on the light of my room. My dog is looking through the window. She's going ballistic, but she's a chihuahua, so she has to just sit this one out. I open my back door. The screaming continues. I turn the porch light on, and right when I'm about to jump off my porch, I look, and there is nothing there. In fact, from where I'm standing, the screaming is coming from my room. I'm like, what? And run inside. All of the screaming is really overwhelming and disorienting. I ran back to my room. The screams are still loud and piercing, and I don't know what to do. There is no one outside and no one inside. What is this? Where is the noise coming from? My dog is on my bed growling, but now she looks scared. She's not in attack mode. She's in I'm right where you've got me mode. Completely scared. In the next few seconds, I decide to try to follow the screams. As I get closer, I realize that this is not coming from outside. It's not coming from the window. The sound is close to the wall, but it's also coming from underneath my bed. I'm not that scared. I'm more like, what? How? The floors in my room were tile. My bed was on a metal frame with wheels. I grabbed the bed and easily pulled it away from the wall. The screaming intensified, but after another few seconds, it just stopped. All of this happened in maybe 30 seconds. After that, everything just stopped. As mysteriously as the thing arrived, it vanished.
My experiences with the supernatural are many, and I could tell you all stories for hours. I'll share 3 in this post. I've been able to see and hear them my entire life, and so is my brother, who I'll call Johnny. The house we grew up in was a hotbed for demonic activity. My earliest memory of seeing a demon was when I was 4 years old. I had been sitting at the kitchen table in my childhood home, eating a bowl of cereal for breakfast. This was while my mother was doing her hair in the bathroom, when I heard footsteps coming towards me from the kitchen. When I turned to look, a hooded shadow figure was standing in front of the refrigerator, and I could feel it looking at me. It called itself the Shiver Man, and when it started to move closer to me, I ran past it into the bathroom with my mom, slammed the door, and locked it. I was utterly terrified when I crawled up on the toilet as my mom asked what was wrong. "Don't open the door, Mom! The Shiver Man is out there and he's going to get me!" She chalked it up to an overactive imagination, and when she unlocked and opened the door, the Shiver Man stepped into the room. His long, bony fingers stretched out towards me, and I backed as far away from him as I could on the toilet, which wasn't far at all. I shivered when he touched me, and he disappeared into the thin air. Some entities stayed in mine and my parents' closets, and I would see them come out at night. I don't know whether it was the same and it just moved closets when I was in the room or if they were separate. When I got older, I asked my friends when they come over if they ever felt strange when they went into my closet, and every one of them said they felt like something was in there with them that wanted them out. For whatever reason, I slept with my walk-in closet door wide open until I was 9. The doors to my and my parents' closets never stayed closed because the part that held them closed in the door frame had been painted over. One night, I had looked at my closet and suddenly a huge demon stepped out. I couldn't see its facial features, thank God, but its silhouette was very clear. It had horns on the top of its huge, round head, a fork in one hand, a knife in the other, and a napkin tied around its neck. As it started walking towards my bed, I gauged the distance between it and me and the door, trying to figure out if I could make it past it so I could get to my parents' room. I finally decided to take the chance, and I bolted from my bed and down the hall to my mom. She let me crawl into bed with her, but I wasn't going to get any reprieve. When I looked into the corner of her room where her closet was, another demon slipped through the crack and into the door. This one was much slimmer. It was probably the Shiver Man because it was slim and hooded, just like he was 5 years prior. When it pointed at me, a swarm of smaller entities emerged from the blackness and lined up around the bed, effectively blocking me in. I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't want to wake my mom up again. I was scared that she would get upset if I woke her up again. I had no idea what to do with these things at that age, so I buried my head under the covers and pressed up against my mom and eventually passed out from exhaustion. The next morning, we went over to my grandmother's for breakfast because one of my auntie and uncles were visiting with their kids, and we didn't get to see them very often. I sat at the table, pushing my fruit around on my plate, trying to make sense of the night before. When my family asked what was wrong, I told them. They all laughed and told me that I was crazy, and I knew I was on my own. I thought I was the only one who could see these things, that no one would ever help me, and no one would understand. 3 years later, I learned otherwise. I had been at a friend's house to play after church when I was 12. For privacy, I'll call her Allie. I remember sitting in her room, talking about demons and what to do if I ever had an encounter with one. I have no idea how we ended up on this subject, but it saved my little brother, who was 10, that night. Allie told me that if I ever saw a demon, all I had to say was, "Get out, in the name of God," and it would have to leave. Later, when I had washed up for bed at night, I just started up the stairs to go to my room when Johnny opened his door and asked if he could talk to me. His was the only bedroom on the main floor. The living room was to the right if you stood facing out the door, and the bathroom was right around the corner to the left. He usually always slept with his bedroom door open. There was an extra mattress on the floor from the sleepover he had with his friends the weekend before, and he had been sleeping on it instead of his bed. I promise those details will be important. He closed the door behind us and we sat down on the bed. "I need to tell you something, but you can't tell Mom and Dad because they'll think I'm crazy," he begged, and I promised I wouldn't. "I know you can see things, so I know you won't think so. The last few days, I've been seeing something follow me," he said. "Whenever I get up at night to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water, I see a big black dog with glowing red eyes come out of the living room and follow me back to my room." I know my eyes bugged out as I recalled what Allie and I had talked about earlier that day, and I swallowed thickly. "Okay," I started, carefully considering my next words. No matter how I put it, I knew what I was going to tell him would terrify him. "Johnny, I don't want to scare you, but I think what you're seeing is a demon." He started to cry, of course. We were only 10 and 12. How the hell are two kids who can see demons supposed to feel when everyone in the family thinks they're insane? Johnny had seen what happened to me when I tried to tell our family what I could see, so he kept his gift to himself. I took his hand in mine. "Look at me, okay? Allie told me today what to do if we ever see a demon. If it comes back tonight, I want you to say, 'In the name of God, get out.' God will protect you, Johnny. He's not going to let anything bad happen to you." He nodded and said, "Okay," and I went upstairs to bed. I should have stayed with him. I don't know why I didn't, but he told me what had happened the next morning. "It came back," he said, but I could see that he felt empowered. "I slept on the mattress on the floor instead of my bed. When I woke up because I had to go to the bathroom, the dog was standing in my room already, snarling and staring at me. I did what you said, and I told it to get out in the name of God, and it turned around with its tail between its legs and walked away and disappeared." He threw his arms around me. "Thank you for telling me what to do." Johnny never saw it again. I don't know if it was a hellhound or just a demon manifesting as a giant black dog with glowing red eyes. A few years ago, when I was telling that same story to a friend, he told me that his mom had seen the same dog when she was in high school. She was babysitting for someone and was watching TV after putting the kids to bed. She turned out all the lights, so the only light in the room was the semicircle from the TV. Suddenly, she felt very uneasy. When she turned to look behind her, she saw the big black dog with red eyes pacing behind the couch, growling and trying to figure out how to get closer to her without touching the light. These are only 3 stories of the activity in that house. When I have time, I'll share more of my experiences. I found myself wondering if the people living there now have ever had any encounters with the demons. More specifically, I've wondered if their children have, and if they've seen anything. I worry that they'll end up feeling like Johnny and I did, like no one in the world will believe them.
I've been an avid camper most of my life. More than that, I actually lived in the Wyoming wilderness for almost 2 years as a child in a house on a nature preserve. A place where electricity was only available by generator, and we had to boil water that me and my siblings carried up from the creek. All of this before I was even 10 years old. If there were emergencies, it would at least be an hour before we could get to help or help could get to us. I've hunted dangerous game. I'm not actually proud of it, but it happened. And I've seen some weird stuff in the desert. So when I say that I will not venture into the woods of the Cascadian mountain range alone, it's important to know that the wilderness doesn't frighten me easily. I was 23 years old when a friend of mine, we'll call him Darren, all names are altered, invited me to a camping trip. The site was a place a few miles up a logging road, so about an hour-long hike from an already back road as F back road. It was just me, Darren, and his good friend Wade. Place was, from the logging road, about 10 minutes down a trail. The moment we got to the site, I was excited. The small lake was beautiful, barely touched by people over the years. It also comforted me somewhat when we got there to see that within the last month at least somebody else had camped out there. Extra wood by the fire pit. We ate a bunch of chili and hot dogs, but around dusk, the guys went off into the woods and came back with a sealed bucket they had buried the years before, and we opened it up to get into some MREs they stowed in their cache. It was looking to be one of the better camping trips I've had in my adult life. That night was a bit different. For the first time in my life, I felt an uneasiness sleeping in my tent. I couldn't quite place it. Chalked it up to not being used to camping without my dad. Darren brought his .38 Special for protection from predators, but he was the only one armed. The next day it rained, and we tried to wait it out, but eventually called it quits, packed up and went home. Fast forward to the next year. Me and Darren get the itch to go camping again, and I wanted to give the site another shot. I spent a great deal of effort convincing a bunch of my friends to tag along. In the end, it wound up being 6 of us and a big white German shepherd. Me, Darren, Wade, James, Charles and Rita, James's girlfriend, and Moogie, the dog. Knowing about the uneasiness I felt the last time, I brought my 12 gauge. James wanted to get some unregulated target practice in, shooting stuff they don't allow at official gun ranges, like full cans and gallon jugs. We also brought a quad up with us this time, so we could haul a bunch of extra water, booze, and other supplies to make our weekend more comfortable. First day, as we're setting up, we hear a loudspeaker playing some music over by the south end of the lake, which was basically right next to the logging road, and this year could be seen from the road unlike the year prior. So, deciding we're big dick Americans, me and James sauntered down to meet the source of the noise pollution. Now, I have to commend the coolness of the cop that was just having a fishing trip when 2 large armed men, me with a 12 gauge, James with his .308, emerged from the tree line. We introduced ourselves, mentioned the others, but not exactly where we were camping, just that it was nearby. That's when shit started to get creepy. It could have just been cops doing cop stuff, but this guy really wanted to know exactly where we were going to be. Then he mentioned his favorite spots nearby and really wanted us to try this other spot 2 more miles down the logging road. At a point, it was almost like he was suggesting that was the only spot where we wouldn't be in trouble. Darren showed up finally, told us that he spoke to the landowners several years ago and they were fine with us being there. Cop was mad, but we lied and said we'd check out the site he was pushing. None of us trusted the guy when we left, so we decided not to. It was like a horror movie setup. The whole shady cop tells us to go to the spot where his hillbilly friends are going to kidnap us kind of vibe. So we move on, pretty early in the day, so we set up our stuff, get a fire going, float around on a giant 4-person inflatable chair boat thing. Biggest highlight of the day? Charles cut down an entire dead tree with nothing but a small axe, like the midway point between a hatchet and a fireman's axe, an impressive feat of stamina and strength. It was a good day leading into a good night, but right after it got dark, I felt uneasy again. The first thing that worried me was a couple of us heard something big splash into the far side of the lake. We thought maybe it was Moogie, but he was by the fire, his head now perked up and looking in the direction of the splash. Since we were drunk, we thought maybe the floaty thing might be compromised, so we went down with our flashlights to pull it out of the water and onto the bank. Then we heard the owl. James, Wade, and Darren were already passed out by midnight. Rita was humming along by the fireplace with Moogie, and me and James were out getting some more wood so the fire would last. We heard an owl start up its hooting, a cadence I was familiar with in the area, but something was off about it. I have a gift for mimicking bird noises, so what I noticed immediately is the ending hoot was off. Almost always sounds like the owl is rolling its R's as that final hoot of the sequence goes. James, not nearly as outdoorsy as me, says, "That almost just sounds like a person." We joke, listen to it a couple more times. Then I do my own attempt at an owl noise. Silence for a few minutes. Just as I'm thinking that makes sense because of the noise, it starts up again. But not just one owl. Another started up about half a second after the first. The new owl sounded more like an actual owl than the first one that seemed to have started up again. And after the first hoot from the real owl, the fake one stopped short. "Did that owl just tell the other owl to shut up?" James says to me. I decide to shout, "Better listen to your wife, dude." Immediately after I shout, we both hear a loud crashing almost identical to the sound of the tree falling that Charles did earlier that day. Moogie starts to go berserk, barking and growling. He had a stink gland issue at this point still, so he was releasing that nastiness as well. He was threatened, and luckily Rita was there to keep him from bolting, because if he really wanted to move, she wouldn't be much of an obstacle. I'm about to shit my pants out of fear. I will reiterate for a fact, I've hunted mountain lions and bears in my life, and at no point during those hunts was I as shaken and genuinely afraid as this. I was paralyzed for like an entire minute. "Whoever that is, you better fuck off. We have plenty of guns," I shout across the lake. Then silence again. Luckily, for the rest of the night, I didn't fall asleep until Darren woke up, basically at sunrise. So I missed breakfast and a morning dunk in the lake the others all did before I got up needing to poo real bad. James had already explained the noises to the others by the time we all were ready for our different adventures. Darren, Wade and Rita just wanted to listen to the radio and chill. Moogie had run off just after lunch, and we decided to go look for him, while also investigating the area of the noises last night. Almost immediately, when we get to the other side of the lake, the hair stands up on the back of my neck. Charles also feels creeped out, but he had an axe. I had a shotgun, and James had his rifle and his .45 holstered on his hip. So we pressed onward, looking for probably a couple of hours. I was mainly trying to see if we could spot any trees that had fallen. Then we made it to the eastern bank of the lake. We were camped on the western side. "Holy shit," Charles says, causing me and James to come rushing over. There, we saw what looked like a human footprint. Just one, but it was very clearly a footprint in the mud, even had a little pool of water still in it. My first thought was Bigfoot, so I took off my boot and compared sizes. I'm a huge guy with pretty large feet, so it wasn't a surprise that my clodhoppers dwarfed this footprint when I put my own print down next to it. But what was weird was the other print. Where the pinky toe would be, it looked like another big toe was there instead. We also found several downed trees, but none that looked recent. So we decided to go around the north of the lake and back to the others, doing a full circle. Mookie was fine. As soon as food smells filled the air, he came running back. And we all had a pretty good day again, drinking, feasting, and making fun of each other for being paranoid. We heard some gunshots a little close, and then we called out to warn the shooters that there were people and animals nearby. The shooters of us actually went to meet the people, and all of us but Darren and Wade joined the old guy and his wife shooting at whatever we could. Part of me consciously thought, anything that was lurking around sure as hell isn't now. Boy, was I wrong. A brief mention about Charles. Ever since we were kids, Charles has had vivid night terrors. Most of the time, funny. Some of the time, scary. He'd full on sleepwalk and have conversations with you while still asleep. We had all gone to bed. I was one of the first, due to getting like 4 hours of sleep and being quite rum drunk. "Hey, who's that?" "Captain, stay in your tent." Charles, who was sleeping on a tarp by the fire instead of a tent, started shouting. I shot up, grabbed the shotgun, and turned on my flashlight. "What's wrong?" I shouted, adrenaline filling my entire existence. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Come closer to the fire. No, don't crouch down. Use your words." He keeps shouting, finally stirring awake James and Rita, who were in the tent closest to Charles. "What the hell?" James calls out. Moogie starts growling, and apparently let off the stink gland again in their tent because him and Rita are like, "Oh, Moog, gross." "There's somebody sneaking up in Captain's tent. Get out here." I start to unzip my tent. "Not you, Captain. Stay in there. He's right next to you." Everybody else, to this day, denies hearing this, but I swear I heard something whisper, "Captain," before hearing a twig crunch right outside my tent. James makes it out of his tent, and seconds later, I hear him laughing. It's just the water stump. Charles is just having a night terror. Charles claims he wasn't dreaming, but when I got out and shined the light on the stump, he agreed that that had to be it. We put one of those big jugs of water on top of a stump. It could easily be mistaken for a white shirt standing in the dark. Satisfied that there wasn't actually anything there, despite my protests, we all went back to bed. Charles stayed in the tent for the rest of the night. I decided to spend the rest of the night on watch. That was one of, if not the most, terrifying nights of my life. I heard more activity in those woods than I had ever heard before. Moogie would wake up and barf multiple times as I'd hear twigs snapping off in the trees. Then I heard a really big snap that had to have only been about 10 feet away. I jumped to my feet, whipped over to where the noise was, and shined my light. I've seen enough deer ass in my life to know what I saw running from me. What is not normal of deer, however, is they don't stand up and run on their back legs. Moogie howled and snarled. I took aim, letting my light drop, and fired. I didn't care that it turned to run. I unloaded, boom after boom after boom, until I ran out of all 6 shells I had loaded. Everyone else was freaking out and rushed out of their tents. I told them what happened, and nobody went back to bed until the morning. Nothing else happened that night. I think Moogie refusing to leave the tent was what allowed the others to take me seriously enough. He was a brave dog, sweet, but if mean dogs messed with him at the park, he knew how to throw down. The last thing that happened, on that last day, Darren and Wade went to bury the bucket after putting some fresh new supplies in it. They'd always known where the cache was buried because there was a stump that they used as a landmark. That stump was just gone. It was there when we retrieved the cache 2 days prior, but now it was vanished. No signs of it being uprooted, dragged, or disturbed. It simply was as though it never existed. We all thought we made a mistake until we found the hole for the bucket, still dug and with the little poncho stuffed in it. Well, I'm never coming back here now, so we may as well take this with us, Darren said, and we all left after lunch. That is why I will never even go hiking the Cascade Wilderness without a firearm and at least 2 other people who know how to use them.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.